Hello, I'm Paul Bevan, and you are watching the Cloud Therapist channel.
Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. Today I'm doing a Cloud State of Play talk with Paul Bevan from Bloor Research. I'm hoping that this is going to be like a bit of a sort of an open mic sort of chit chat between us and maybe even make it as a regular slot. And who knows, maybe we can do it even monthly if we can fit it into our diaries. Now, before I go on, I do want Paul to show us his shirt, because he was showing this when we were doing the prep earlier. So please show us what's on your shirt, Paul.
Oh, well, I'll have to lean back and stand up slightly. And you've now got three-quarters of your audience has just switched off.
Just switched off. I know my stats are just going to go down after. If I'd known you were going to wear that shirt, I wouldn't have let you on today. Anyway, we're there. So the idea will be really for us to, I guess, kind of have an open discussion on various topics in the IT industry. And anything that's kind of really piqued our interest since the last time Paul and I spoken. We're quite passionate about a lot of things, and we do lots of research and kind of chit chat. So what you guys probably don't see, our dear viewers, is that Paul and I do WhatsApps and emails and things like that, and send links to each other all the time in the background. So I do appreciate Paul's opinion on these things, and I think it's just an interesting kind of area for us to go through. Not sure how long we're kind of going to go on. We're just, like I said, we're just going to kind of keep it open and just focus on a few subjects and just keep it really laid back and relaxed. So it's kind of a couple of grumpy old men with too much knowledge of the IT industry having a go at various things. Anyway, so Paul is a senior researcher from Bloor Research, and he's kind of really accepted the challenge to do this with me. Let's just say hello to Paul. How are you doing today?
Fine, thanks, Richard. Yeah, good to talk to everybody. I'm doing fine. You say this old boy here is getting on, but he's hanging on in there, I think, is best to describe it.
Cool.
And I love the difference between our two backgrounds. It's sort of, I think this will probably be covered in our talk a little bit. But
we're going to pick up on something around that. Yes, we are, indeed. So, so I think, the idea is for us is that we're hopefully going to sort of pick up, like I said, we're always reading articles and blog posts and various other content. So like I said, we share that all the time. Topics for today, I thought we'll kind of cover a little bit about, and you mentioned this earlier, and I thought it was a great thing just to kind of do on the spur of the moment, kind of the two worlds of IT, and I'll let you sort of describe that in a minute when we sort of get into that. But there seems to be kind of a slight disparity there in terms of kind of things that are happening around sort of technology and how organizations of various ages, those organizations being whether they're kind of fairly relatively new or startups, or they're kind of more established enterprise, and how they kind of look at IT. And the other one, which I thought would be quite interesting, cloud network management. Now, that's probably not a phrase that anybody's heard, so I'm coining it today. And if anybody's kind of hears it somewhere else, so this is where you heard it first, hopefully, unless I'm breaching somebody's copyright or something on that. But cloud network management is kind of sort of network management for the cloud, sort of grown up, I suppose. That's kind of the sort of thing that we want to cover today. And we'll kind of mention some recent examples and demos that we've heard about and seen. And then the third one was kind of a little bit more going back to our favorite subject, observability. Paul and I've done a video on that in the past. So if you're interested in learning more about observability and AIOps, or again for us kind of see us sort of having a go at each other around observability and AIOps, do check out the video that I've done already with Paul. I'll put a link on it on the in the description of this video. But yeah, sort of around sort of observability versus APM, or application performance management. So that's again a fascinating area, and how that kind of those two are sort of working out and where they're going, really. Okay, so Paul, let me sort of hand it over to you to kind of just describe a little bit about to the first topic, which was sort of these two worlds of IT.
Yeah, I sometimes feel, as an analyst, I sometimes feel I live in two parallel universes. The one is, dominated by cloud native folks. It's all a fast, rapid application development. It's new stuff. It's bright. It's shiny. It's exciting. And then there's the sort of what I would classify the enterprise world, particularly where they've got lots of legacy equipment. And actually, on one side, on the sort of cloud side, you're talking to deeply technical people. On the enterprise side, then there's business people trying to get to grips with what they need to do, and a few old-fashioned IT folks who never got pulled across into the other world.
Right.
And allegedly they speak the same language. They supposedly speak English, but when one side talks to the other, the cloud side talks to the cloud native side talks to the enterprise side.
Yeah.
They might be speaking French. It's not Mandarin. I thought originally it was Mandarin, but then you wouldn't understand anything. And the danger is that in speaking French, you recognize some of the words, but I'm not quite sure you understood the whole meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. So I think we're, two worlds separated by the same language, a bit like the Americans and the English. It's sort of, and the Brits. So Gartner coined the term, didn't they? 10 years ago, we reckon, or even longer ago, bimodal IT.
Bimodal IT, yes. Bimodal model.
This idea that businesses almost needed to split their IT departments into, one's developing the new applications and one managing and running the legacy world, which I always used to find deeply upsetting, I think, because I think, culturally it was the wrong thing to do. But I think we are in that place. That's probably exactly where we are.
And do you think that's kind of sort of by actually defining it and sort of pigeonholing it, do you think that's actually created more of a chasm? It's kind of expanded that chasm?
Yeah, I do. I don't necessarily think it's, Gartner's term itself. That didn't help, because I think it's sort of encapsulated that sort of, hey, we're all the new guys, we're going to be doing wonderful things, and all the old fogies are on the other side. And the danger was that you lost a whole load of skills, and we'll come back to some of the what's the same between the two worlds as opposed to the differences.
Yeah.
But at the moment, there's a real sense of two very different worlds, and I think it's not quite bimodal IT. It's the difference between the developer and the operations people. For all we've had this discussion once or twice. For all the improvements made by DevOps, real cooperation and collaboration between development and operations is still not the norm. In the best practice in DevOps and the best practice in the sort of digital native world has gone a long way to getting rid of those silos. But, for the large swathes of enterprise and and sort of immature cloud development, there's a bigger and bigger gulf between developers, developing things very rapidly and throwing it at IT ops and saying, fix that. It's like, and they say, then you go into the enterprise side and it's just a different world. So I think, yes, it has. It unfortunately, it does seem to have made that gap wider.
Yeah, and then what I'm seeing as well is that because of that gap, the technology is beginning to, so not just culturally, but the technology is beginning to split as well. So people continue to develop sort of for the data center and the sort of the more established enterprise sort of solutions and platforms versus the kind of the whiz bang new kind of cloud native sort of approach, very sort of DevOpsy, very automated and more more focus on the software stack versus kind of the infrastructure side of things.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little unfair. I mean, mainframes have got a bad name. They're sort of, because they're old-fashioned and they were deemed to be very expensive and not very flexible.
You can run Kubernetes on them.
But exactly, I mean, if you look at IBM Z series or you look at Unisys ClearPath systems, they are, completely different beasts. They run on Intel Intel processors. Certainly, the ClearPath to run on Intel processors. Their software stack is now got lots of open elements, and they've really split it up into into a sort of open source type arena too. IBM obviously far more than Unisys because they've got a much bigger base to play with and more resources. But actually, and a colleague of mine in Bloor has made quite a strong case that says, mainframes would make damn good cloud infrastructure. And we're now starting to call it. We were going to call it Enterprise Server 3.0. We've ended up with Mainframe 3.0 as a sort of moniker for it. But I think partly you're right. Partly there is still development and technology developments and software, techniques, if you like, that are pretty old-fashioned. But the vendors have done an awful lot to make their mainframes or their older systems far more flexible in this sort of world. Whether it's the ability to provide pricing based on usage, so that you do that, through to completely availability of open source tool sets for development and management. So I think but nonetheless, I think if you look at it, one of the big challenges, and we came across this at a big bank not that long ago, was that there's a sort of mindset that says, I'm not going to develop the mainframe on anymore, I'll let it sort of die out. And found they can't quite get off quick enough, but they haven't kept up to date with what the vendors have been doing in terms of making the mainframe more open. And therefore they've got this huge jump to make now, not just in terms of the application, but the whole operating environment, because they decided not to, take the latest versions of the operating system or the latest chipsets or whatever. And the reality is they've now given themselves a bigger headache. So it's a mindset issue too, that says, I'm not going to spend any more money on the mainframe.
And but you're also seeing, I've also seen, for example, some tools and capabilities that actually allow you to actually take your mainframe software or mainframe app as is and actually run it in a public cloud. So there's like an emulator of some kind, type of software. I think the likes of Micro Focus, for example, do that kind of stuff.
There are a number of vendors and tool sets out there claiming to be able to do that. I don't think the track record of taking those across and running them in a public cloud has been particularly successful.
I can't speak for that either. I just do know that those kind of solutions do exist.
There's been one or two reports, of course, you always have to look at the sort of who wrote the report in the first place. But clearly there are people who've tried to do that, and back to that Dilbert thing about, couldn't you just put it all in a container and run it on in the cloud? The answer is maybe.
Maybe.
And again, things like the perception that cloud was cheaper than legacy has actually, when you try and turn a legacy system over into the cloud, however well you do it, actually your costs probably go through the roof. It doesn't run as well, all those sort of issues. So I think, yes, there are tools, people are trying it. Has it been a great success? No. Has it been a total failure? No. And what
somewhere
we're
seeing,
what we're seeing is there are groups of tools out there now that do what they call know before you go.
Okay.
You can actually run simulations of your legacy application, your legacy environment, as if it were running in the cloud, to see how it performs before you then commit to the bill you're going to get from AWS or Azure or GCP. So there's a whole set of tools. Vertana is one company I can think of that has a pretty good
I've heard of them.
Yeah, it was the old virtual instruments. They've got a really good set of suite of tools now that enable you to emulate your legacy environment and see whether it will run effectively. And again, it was another one where they had to buy in. I think it was Metrically they bought a company called Metrically to help them more understand the cloud environment. But there are those tool sets starting to appear now to help people do that know before you go.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, okay, so maybe kind of looking at it on the other side, then what's actually happening, with this new world of cloud native, not so new world, but maybe new world to some people. But what's kind of, the sort of the jeans and t-shirts brigade, what's kind of happening on that side? And how is that fitting in with as we said, kind of more established sort of infrastructures and cultures and enterprises?
I think, I mean, I liken it, if I can draw an analogy, the whole sort of cloud native world feels a bit like, they're fixing problems as they go along. And I think we've got to a stage of things being fairly mature now. And I liken it to, an analogy which I've used in a recent blog post, which is, if you're showing my age, if you're a cricket fan, you remember an awesome pair of West Indian bowlers in the 1960s called Charlie Griffiths and Wes Hall, who used to bowl the most horrendously fast bouncers at batsmen. And batsmen were wearing a pair of pads, fairly thin gloves, and maybe a box. And that would be about the height of it. No helmets, no padding, no around the chest. And so these guys were flinging stuff down at 100 miles an hour. And of course, you've got no respite because there were two of them doing it each end as you turned around. And people were getting hit, people were getting hurt, and they started to develop new ways of making sure they didn't get hit and get hurt and be able to play against these guys doing that sort of thing. And it just felt like an analogy for, you now look at a cricket batsman going out, he's got a helmet. The helmet's gone through 3 or 4 iterations of extra bits added to it when they suddenly realized they missed that bit and the ball managed to get between the visor and and you think this is very much like, and we seem to have got the point where, an awful lot of it's being fixed, and we're going to hit on GitOps now, I think, without even meaning to hit on GitOps. And back to this gap, there was a gap. The developers were pushing things to production at a huge rate. They'd love to say it was a pull process, but they were throwing stuff at production. And Kubernetes just showed how difficult it was to configure infrastructure, in the whole infrastructure code piece. How the hell do you do Kubernetes? It was really difficult. And then you get GitOps and Weaveworks and people like that automating the process and fixing it to a point where I think you've got a very sophisticated environment on that side. And 2 things have happened. Firstly is, actually, when you look at them, they're things that systems people on the other side already knew about. If you look at the ancestry, if you like, of cloud messaging, IBM MQ series, is quite often the underpinning of what was going on there. The whole issue of offloading process away from the processor to a specialist processor, now used extensively in the cloud. Well, mainframes did that virtually from day one. They had to, because obviously they didn't have the power to be able to handle everything in one sense. And so what we're seeing is a maturation of the cloud world, I think, into something very, very powerful, built on that, but without any real appreciation of where it's come from. And on the other side, and this is the problem with bimodal IT, you're losing the ability to get old codgers like me who've got technical skills, and I haven't got the technical skills. But there's a whole bunch of people.
So that's even worse then for you, Paul.
Sorry?
So that's even worse for you.
It's even worse for me, because there's a whole bunch of technical specialists in the enterprise side who actually understand all the issues you're facing about atomicity and performance and and data security and all those sort of things. And when you unpick it all, it always seems that the problem hasn't changed. If you take the business requirement for I need a new web-based order processing system for all my online clients worldwide yesterday, please.
Yeah.
The challenge of turning that into machine code, which is ultimately where you have to end up, it is the same. However much you use slightly different tools or slightly different techniques, the problem is the same. And a lot of the guys you talk to, who are now probably, in their 70s, some of them, they'll go, we had to deal with that back in the 60s and the 70s. And actually, a lot of the underlying technology is the same. But no, I mean, I think if you are a new company, why would you go and do it the old way?
True. Yeah.
I think that's the story. Cloud native, if you're a startup, if you're a new organization, if you want to take advantage of some of the latest, because all the new developments are happening over there as well. That's the other challenge.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everything's happening on that side.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is you can go do it, but realize it's still bloody complicated. Excuse my language. It is complicated. It is complex. Maybe it shouldn't be so as complicated. And there's so many moving parts which have been broken out into their constituent elements in a cloud world, whereas in a mainframe world, actually they were all inside that big black box and you didn't know what was going on. Now you've opened it up and you can suddenly say, oh. And so I think, back to the challenge on the enterprise side is to get the business people in the enterprise to understand, yes, this is a great way of going, but don't necessarily expect it to be that much cheaper because it's still damn complex.
Yeah, and I was actually at a meetup recently, and I mean, we were talking about the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape, the CNCF landscape.
Yep.
And you only need to look at that, I think, chart to see how many projects there are, how complex it is, and how many moving parts, as you said, there are. And I remember, I think we had a conversation a while back, and I said to you, I tend to, I screenshot that landscape, and I put that up into a singular slide with nothing else on it, just as a kind of a scary thing to show to customers. This is what you got to deal with, when you're there. So it's definitely kind of more complicated. And you mentioned kind of message queuing and things like that. So we've kind of gone from that to things like streaming of events and stuff like that. I think that's kind of the more sort of latest terms. And again, with what we used to call, I think, enterprise service bus, ESB, is now kind of microservices, or at least kind of microservices come from that sort of background, and it's kind of iterated over the years. Interesting. So let's kind of and by the way, I loved your analogy with the cricket thing. So by the way, for international viewers, if you're kind of wondering what cricket is, just look at baseball. So actually try and do baseball without the helmets. That's kind of pretty much what Paul is talking about. But let's kind of move on a little bit to cloud network management. Now, like I said earlier, I'm hoping that I've actually coined this phrase, so you never know, maybe it'll catch on. But the idea was really it was kind of based on cloud data management, and that's kind of a focus around how do you do your backup. So if you're kind of do your data backup in the cloud, and how you do your sort of recovery in the cloud. Yes, folks, you do have to do some data backup and recovery even in the cloud. It's not magic. So cloud network management, the idea was to really look at kind of a similar approach where you're now really taking, I guess, networking seriously. Whereas previously we could kind of string a DNS together, and kind of the cloud would take care of the IP addresses for you. You don't have to worry about that, and maybe throw an ingress controller into your sort of Kubernetes cluster, and hey presto, it's all kind of, you got your traffic working and so on. So it's all kind of a piece of string sort of configuration. I think now we're having to, because the environment in the cloud that we're setting up with all these sort of orchestration tools and containers and microservices, things like that, and obviously things like governance pieces like security coming into it as well. We really have to sit up and kind of focus more on the networking side, and actually take networking seriously, and actually start doing some of the stuff, at least that we were doing in the data center around networking, which is kind of sort of around monitoring and things like that. So cloud network management, the idea is that where you're basically now focusing a lot more around that. And I mentioned to you, I think the likes of Aviatrix. I was at the AWS Summit in Berlin a while back, and I had a demo from Aviatrix, and they kind of showed me what their platform does, and I thought that was really fantastic. The question I had was, how many people are doing this, and how many people are aware that they need to do this in the cloud as well, or are they kind of, excuse me, as you said earlier, kind of just stringing things together and fixing it as they go along?
I think it's a huge gap. I mean, I've been sort of talking about the network visibility gap for 3 or 4 years now, because the traditional network performance management people just sort of said, well, it's public cloud or it's public networks, it's not under our control. All you're managing is effectively your data center networks.
Yeah.
You think, well, no, hold on a minute, that's not the way the world is these days, but they all got very evasive, and it's sort of pressures coming from 2 angles. If you use a single public cloud, then you can probably use the tools, from that single public cloud provider, which will do a job. But the reality is that very few people are using a single cloud now, and we're even starting to see applications where a single application, if you like, if I can call it that, or a single business service, probably is the better thing, uses interfaces to more than one cloud. So you can get, in a trading environment, you can get market sentiment analysis from AWS. You can get, then how do I tune the algorithm? For trading algorithm, you will use GCP. Going to do that. And now then you execute probably in a co-location facility, and much more sort of traditional co-location facility. How the hell do you make sure that the network between all those 3, works optimally? And therefore, you get companies like Thousand Eyes, which Cisco have now bought. Cisco, and see that give you the ability, I think, to have a very different conversation with the cloud providers that says, how do you route this stuff? How can I ensure that your BGP policies are going to be the most effective for us? And I think so you won't hand day-to-day control over the networks back to network operations controllers in enterprises or businesses.
Yeah.
But the idea is now you need to architect and think about what it is you want your network to help you achieve.
Yeah.
And then use the tools that will give you a different conversation with the cloud provider. I mean, the idea that you go to AWS and say, actually, I don't want you to route me that way, I want you to route me this way, is a very different conversation than just saying, I've given it to AWS and I'll take it whichever way they go. Yeah. And I think those sort of conversations are starting to happen. But it's not well known yet. This is very early days for this, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, apart from Aviatrix that I mentioned earlier, Isovalent as well as a company that's kind of working in that space. So Bill Mulligan, if you're watching, shout out to you. I thought the kind of their focus on what they're doing with eBPF, I think, which is I don't remember the extended Berkeley packet filter, I think, standard, which is kind of, I think it's based in the Linux kernel, Linux version 4 kernel and above, I believe. The kind of work that they're doing and what eBPF would offer to customers who are actually implementing that technology and using it in their cloud environment. I think it's kind of taking what you would do at the application sort of stack, or at the application, it's kind of taking that back and doing it at an earlier sort of stage, really. I think that's really interesting because it will help in a lot of areas, including things like with microservices and proxies and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a general move, shift left for everything. Get it in as early as you possibly can. The interesting one for me, and it sort of went into an odd direction, but the whole intent-based networking too. If you think about declarative, actions within a cloud environment, you declare what the desired state is going to be, and then you can monitor whether that's actually going to, where that's happening, and adjust accordingly. And a company called Apstra got bought by Juniper in the end, so it's become quite sort of focused on non-cloud, if you like. It's very campus-based and mainframe, but Cisco's got itself involved in sort of intent-based networking, and so you can see all this starting to come in, and you're getting back to a point where you're saying, I declare what I want it to do, and what's the best way of doing it, and then, if you like, negotiating automatically, probably with the networks to say what's the best route. How's that going to operate for me on this basis? And again, that's quite sophisticated stuff, and a lot of people won't necessarily need that. But the more we rely on the network for our business, the more you're going to have to get into it. So hopefully that is you are the first person to use the term, and get the kudos for it. But I think it's very early stages. It has been a huge black hole. That's the only way I can describe it. People have suddenly found, why is my response times between here and Southeast Asia so bad? Only to discover that AWS routes it one particular way, GCP routes it another, makes a complete difference to the way in which it works.
Correct.
Therefore, you've got to get to grips with that beforehand to have those conversations. So I think it's a sort of get to grips with beforehand, design in a sort of intent-based declarative type approach, and then monitor the life out of it. And that's when you need 1,000 eyes.
Yeah. And also I'm thinking kind of, aren't you sort of, if you're sort of doing Kubernetes and stuff like that, and then on the other side you got sort of your SAP environment, which you just kind of moved into the cloud, and then somewhere else you got some other sort of line of business sort of stuff so it's not necessarily containerized and running in Kubernetes, it's just running in an instance in the cloud. So isn't that kind of your the networking and in those sort of areas, in those sort of pockets of your cloud, you're kind of sort of slightly isolating the networking configuration into those areas. So it's kind of specific. The Kubernetes cluster networking is there. The one for SAP is kind of designed for that or is configured for that. But there isn't this sort of holistic view of everything, or a a sort of a one admin sort of platform that can issue out the configuration for all of those areas of your cloud.
That's right. I mean, that's why I say it's early in those stage. If each of those individually have probably got tools in which you can manage that.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually being able to architect it and declare it, intent-based, and then say, right, now set this up, and have the sort of alternate routings available to you should it go wrong. And again, you look at, are the interfaces, I was going to say APIs, are the interfaces there, the common interfaces, and you back to the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, I'm trying to do some stuff around that, and Open Compute, all trying to get sort of standards. And that's always, a challenge. But fundamentally, when you talk to networks, I mean, it is packets over a network. Once it's got beyond, the development environment, and you actually send it out over the wire, it's pretty much in a common environment. So you ought to be able to set that up from a single point. But it isn't at the moment. I agree.
Yeah, and the interesting, when I saw the demo from Aviatrix in Berlin, as they were demoing, and they said, and we can do SD-WAN for you as well, or we kind of look at SD-WAN. So SD-WAN, whereas it was like a topic itself a few years ago, and you actually had startups sort of cropping up around and creating their own sort of solutions for SD-WAN, and that's all they did. Aviatrix actually made it sound like it was just yet another thing that we manage and monitor and and configure for you as part of their platform, which was really interesting to see that.
It is. I mean, Sd-Wan, stick my neck out. I suppose if you look at the sort of 7-layer model or whatever, Sd-Wan is trying, is abstracting stuff away from what happens underneath. But physically, what happens underneath is critical to the way in which those networks work. So unless, and once it gets down to sort of, layer 7 and layer 6 and whatever, it's wire traffic. And it's packets and all the same thing you have to do. So as long as not everybody needs wired data in terms of monitoring, but increasingly, I mean, if you're in fast-moving, low latency type environments, you've got to be down at that level. And therefore, if there are multiple different networks out there, you've got to find some way of monitoring them. The glory of Sd-Wan and the glory of any of what I call big software. I mean, that was a term that Ubuntu sort of came up with, was the idea that software, Mark Andreessen's software will eat everything type approach. But the whole glory of our software, everything as software, is it does abstract those issues away, but doesn't make them go away. It abstracts it away from the developer. They're still there. They still need to be fixed.
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely. And and like I said, with sort of the likes of iSurveillance sort of coming up with, or focusing on eBPF, like I said, it just complicates that environment even more. Not from, I don't mean from their solution. I just mean the networking itself in the cloud now becomes complicated, especially if you, as I said, sort of isolate some of the workloads that you have as well, and the configuration of the network, being actually sitting within those pockets, within those isolated pockets. I think that will eventually it will make things, difficult for people. So so cloud network management, CNM. Maybe we'll pick up on that.
I think so. I think it's, watch this space, but I think people are realizing that this is an issue they need to address.
Indeed. Okay, cool. So let's move on to the third topic, which we have visited before, as I said earlier, sort of around observability, but also with the app performance management. What's happening? What's you kind of think? What's the latest thing you've picked up on there?
Well, a lot of the APM people have been buying observability tool vendors. So you've actually seen quite a lot of, which in itself says something, that actually there are some key differences between, observability tools and general APM tools. I think that's right. I always, and this is where you and I initially started to disagree, but I think we sort of come sliding closer and closer.
I told you you'll come around to my way of thinking.
I know, and
I told
have
you that.
done. And
I have that on record on the last.
You do have that on record, and I'm now going on record and saying you were right.
Yay! I win.
So, I've sort of long been of the view that observability was, as much as anything else, a DevOps tool or a developer's tool, because it's this shift left again. How on earth, in this complex environment, do you ensure that, as you go through testing, automated testing and deployment, that it's going to work right first time? And that was the observability into the code and all the bits that are being, given all the elements of the infrastructure. Again, you declare it and then can I monitor it again? So I think, I get the difference. Well, the thing that's bothered me recently that I've been seeing is that the term observability has increasingly crept into the IT monitoring world.
Oh, okay.
So network performance management vendors seem to be the worst offenders in this, of using the term observability, partly because they had this concept long before observability that wire data was observed data. Event data was assumed data because what did you put in, depending on what you put into the log, whereas the wire data was absolutely real. You could observe what was going down the line. So give them a little bit of slack, but they are generally, their marketing departments are now going, we've got observability solutions. But generally within the sort of IT monitoring space, you are seeing the term observability being used as a sort of, and this is why I think you and I disagreed to start with, because to me at the time, it was just another way of saying end-to-end visibility. Actually, it's not.
No,
it's not. And I really do understand now where this one sits. So it's and it's interesting to watch the likes of App Dynamics or was it New Relic and people like that buying into, companies like CodeStream or ServiceNow buying Lightstep. So there's sort of this sort of sense that actually there's an area that APM doesn't cover.
Yes,
that we need to do that, and APM is, APM is good. I mean, I suppose it was designed for traditional applications. If you want to deep dive on the code and all the, the way it works, APM is good. But fundamentally, it doesn't work in the same sort of way that modern app developers are working. Hence, this is why observability's come along. If APM was any use in a DevOps environment, people wouldn't have had to buy what they've just had to buy.
Right.
It's almost as simple as that.
But
APM tools have had that and still have their place. If you get a problem that's clearly in the application and there's a million lines of code, an APM tool is damn good at getting to where the issue is.
So the view, if I was to draw this in a sort of a diagram, I would say kind of observability as sort of the umbrella tool. Part of the tricks in the toolbox is APM on one side, obviously the usual kind of metrics, logs, and traces. By the way, the way just a tip for everybody and for you as well, Paul. The way I remember that now is I shorten it to MELT. So metrics, logs, and traces. That's the only way I can remember. I can never remember all three. But I finally shortened it to something called MELT, and MELT I can now remember, and I can remember what. And
you get it. There's another interesting one coming along, which is going to completely destroy your acronym.
Oh, is it?
Which is, if you look at, because there's been this gap, network gap in the cloud, in terms of visibility. Digital experience management is becoming a big thing. Right?
Yeah,
and of course,
I've heard of that.
And a lot of that depends on what they call flows, network flows. When what you're trying to do is say, where is that transaction or that interaction? What's the flow down between the end user and trying to trace it from that perspective? So it's slightly different than traces, which are quite specific. So flows always helps to give you the topology. But digital experience management has become more and more important the more public cloud you get.
Right. I'll stick a little pin on that. I'll come back to that one because that one's quite interesting. There's something else I want to just mention to you. So we're gonna have time to go.
So all I was saying was, as well as your MELT, you've got an F there as well. So put that in the middle of that.
I gotta flat or something. Flat. Anyway, I'll figure that out. So what I was saying was like observability up there, and then you got APM on one side, you got MELT and the kind of the tradition of what observability is, and then you've got AI ops on the other side. And I think that's why we're seeing this kind of consolidation as well, and also not just consolidation but actually expansion from within the vendors in those spaces. So somebody who was kind of very observability and stuff, now if you look at the marketing stuff, they say AI ops, which has been happening for a while because I've pointed that out to you, I think in the past. You and I've had chats about it, but also now they're saying, oh no, we do APM as well. So they kind of, the observability crowd has kind of gone, they're not just MELT, but they've gone, AI ops in the part, as part of that, and kind of they've adopted that over the last few years, but also now APM as well. So they're kind of encroaching in the app dynamics and sort of is it Turbonomic?
Turbonomic, New Relic. There's a whole bunch of them.
Is Turbonomic owned by IBM, isn't it?
It is.
They got acquired, okay.
So. And IBM bought Instana too. So I mean, you get
Instana.
So I mean, and again, you run into the likes of IBM, the likes of BMC or Micro Focus, who've built these sort of suites I'm going to say integrated suites, but I drop the term integrated because I'm not so sure how integrated they are, because I tend to sort of, cobbled together, if you like, or linked together various capabilities, either that they've designed or bought.
CT suites, cobbled together suites.
Oh God, I'm going to be in trouble.
I've coined another one. It's all right. I'll take all the blame, Paul. I'll take all the blame for that. They can sue me.
But nonetheless, I mean, there are very few out there that are. And I'm back to the same. There was an idea 2 or 3 years ago that you might be able to get one tool to manage all that sort of end-to-end visibility, manageability. And the new sort of containerization, Kubernetes world, and IoT and edge at the other end have blown that out of the water completely.
So it used to be systems management and IT service management, ITSM. So systems management has gone away. So all those or it's remained where it used to be, which is in the data center, really. ITSM has kind of bridged a little bit over. So we see all the likes of ServiceNow and whatever kind of, and MuleSoft and people like that kind of doing that sort of stuff. But mainly it's all gone for the cloud sort of space. It's all gone around observability. And now we're seeing, like I said, this sort of, so apart from Melt, you've got apart from metrics, logs, and traces, you've got AI ops, which the observability sort of vendors have been trying to do or doing for a little bit of while now, for a number of years now. But now also they're bringing in APM under that sort of umbrella as well. So you could go to one vendor like Dynatrace, Datadog, or whoever, or Sysdig, and people like that, and they will have all three of those sort of capabilities. And obviously that's kind of probably made it more attractive to go and actually, or if you don't have that, for you to go and buy that capability. So if you don't have APM, you go and buy an APM vendor.
Yeah, I think it's, one of the challenges vendors have faced in that market is that most IT operations and network operations teams have their own preferred tools. And
they're still stuck with data center stuff.
They're still, and I mean, but Dynatrace will go across both, So Dynatrace is probably one of the most fully featured integrated systems out there.
Agreed.
But again, they would sort of struggle to do everything that you need to do. Plus, it's quite a large-scale, risky job to throw out all the existing tools and put it in with one like Dynatrace. They've found it really difficult to move that particular needle, so they will find themselves getting complete, new greenfield environment, or getting parts of their system in to complement what's going on. Which brings me back around to AI ops. And I'm hosting, if you like, is probably the best way, a small round table on AI ops on next week in London. And one of the issues that you're so highlighting there is this, all these different things we're talking about here coming together, huge amounts of data. What the AI ops becomes is if you like, the hub at the center, the controlling center, because it's pulling in all the feeds. It's pulling in the observability feeds. It's pulling in the IT monitoring, the server monitoring, all those feeds. It's pulling in the network performance management feeds. And using AI and machine learning to do the correlation, to find out where the real problem is, and doing the topology mapping. So it's become the central hub. Whereas a lot of people, when they talk about AI ops, they mean about provide or using bits of AI and bits of ML on their existing systems to improve bits of their existing systems, not that correlation hub at the middle. Big data, analytics, and then automation. How do you automate with IT service management? Those sort of issues.
So you mentioned earlier. So the thing I want to maybe for us to discuss next time, hopefully, is the differences between digital transformation, cloud migration, and digital transformation, cloud transformation, and app migration. So we won't go into it now, but that's kind of a little bit.
Well, you got me going there.
You got me going. Yeah. Oh, I've got another 10 hours ago.
I got the boxing gloves out for that one.
Excellent. that you reminded me of that, because you said earlier, what was it? You said digital transformation flows or something. What was the term?
No. So when you're doing digital experience management,
That's the one. Yeah.
and network performance management, who are used to that, is as well as logs, metrics, and traces,
yeah,
they have something called flows,
yeah,
which is an enhanced view of how the traffic is going across the network, so that you can link, the digital experience at the one end to all of the, what's happening, where it ends up, what server does it end up on, and those.
okay.
So it's a way of mapping the flow right across. And obviously that's very important when you've got a public network in the way. You need to be able to see what that end user, what it ends up at the other, when it comes out, pops out the public network at the other end.
Excellent. Okay, so that's a bit of homework for me to go and research that maybe for next time, and we'll come with our gloves on or something and have a go.
The argument probably won't be with you, but I mean, it will be with the industry in the way that they talk about digital transformation in particular.
I have some interesting kind of views on that. So let's see kind of how
let's see how that goes.
How that goes next time. Okay, excellent. Well, Paul, I think we've kind of done enough ranting for one session. So I really appreciate you coming on to do this. I think if we can, we'll try and do this on a regular basis, the Cloud State of Play sort of slot. But yeah, thank you, Paul, and I'll speak to you next time.
Richard, it was great to talk to you as ever, and we'll speak soon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to the channel. See you next time.